Okay, um, so this lecture is entitled Exercise and Mental Health. This is the lecture for April 1st, Monday, which is the first day that I am not expecting to be on campus. So, hopefully this works out here. Kind of a new system that I'm trying here. All right, so today we're going to be talking about exercise and mental health. So, current state of affairs in the country, we have relatively high rates of mental disorders, specifically for anxiety and depression. Now, depending on what numbers you're looking at, estimates will vary, but roughly 17% of the population, 17% of the United States of America can expect to experience some sort of anxiety disorder at some point in their lives. For depressive disorders, that number is roughly 11%. And again, those numbers vary based on what numbers you're looking at. Combined, about a quarter of the population has a lifetime risk. So at some point in their lifetime, they will experience either an anxiety disorder or a depression disorder. So that's one in every four people, I guess would be the correct word there. Um, that's pretty high. The mental health care industry is booming right now. Roughly $45 billion a year is spent on improving people's mental health. The World Health Organization says that depression will be the second most common cause of death in the year 2020. Uh, for those of you keeping track, that is next year. So this is a pretty big deal. Mental health is becoming a public health issue. It is something that is affecting millions of people across the country, millions of people across the planet. Now, when many people get diagnosed with some sort of mental illness, they usually seek out treatment that can take several different forms. It could be sort of person to person therapy, it could be drugs, some medications, or it could be a combination of both medication and therapies. Now, um, there are numerous possible reasons for why these numbers of mental health patients are so high. And I am not discrediting those other possible factors, but I'm going to focus on one factor in particular. And that would be as a country, um, our relative lack of physical exercise in our daily lives. So it may be kind of convenient to think of us as fish out of water in the modern world. So if you think about your day-to-day routine in the 21st century here, you spend a lot of time sitting down, usually at a desk, usually in front of a computer screen, kind of exactly like I'm doing right now. This is pretty common. It's pretty typical for most people, not just college students, but your average job today is rather sedentary. Um, and this is completely different from the environment that our bodies evolved in. We evolved as active critters. We had to move around. We had to be physically fit just to survive. We had to exert ourselves physically on a daily basis just to get food and water and shelter. So by shifting out of that sort of exercised, physically exertion based existence and transitioning into this more sedentary 9 to 5 lifestyle, there have been some side effects that come along with that. And the biggest one and the most obvious one for what we're talking about right now is the fact that we no longer have regular access to physical exercise. It's something that we have to artificially add into our daily routines. And some people do that more successfully than others. It's almost become somewhat of a luxury to have time to physically exercise. And this is completely different from the environment that our bodies and our minds evolved in. Okay, next slide here. So, that is one of the main causes of this mental health epidemic in the United States today, um, and across the globe, is our lack of physical exercise. So, there's obviously many, many positive benefits to exercising, and I'm sure you guys have been exposed to those benefits. You've talked about those benefits in other classes, probably in like high school health class, those kinds of things. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about physical benefits. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the mental benefits. Um, so on the mental health side of things, for virtually every measurable factor, there is a decrease in negative symptoms, which would be things like anxiety and depression, and an increase in positive symptoms. An increase in what we call subjective well being is the most prominent. So, subjective well being is sort of a very simple measure of how happy you are. Your subjective well being is how happy you are at any given point in time. You could also have a subjective well-being measure of how happy you have been in the last day or the last week or the last year, or how happy have you been in your whole life. So it's a really straightforward, kind of blunt force measure of happiness. It's a very, very common measure of happiness in the field of psychology. So that's sort of the takeaway message. We'll talk a little bit more specifically about what aspects of mental health are positively impacted, but that's the general story. Negative symptoms go down, positive symptoms go up when we exercise. Now, an important question to ask is what types of exercise will lead to those benefits? And the truth is, it doesn't really matter what type of exercise. So, a huge wide range of activities will lead to those benefits. It could be high intensity aerobic exercise, so those big long distance runs that you go on every once in a while, or those 2, 3, 4 mile runs that you go on every once in a while. That would be sort of like a high intensity aerobic exercise. If you're going fast, I guess. It could be more simple cardio exercise. Strength training is thrown in there as well, flexibility even. So if you like to practice yoga a lot, you will definitely see some positive benefits there as well. So again, the takeaway message here is that exercise is good, and it doesn't really matter what that exercise looks like. So what exactly happens specifically on the mental side of things when you exercise? So we're going to talk about two different types of effects: acute effects and then chronic effects. So acute effects are the things that happen immediately after you exercise, or sometimes even during an exercise period. So first up, your anxiety goes down, and I'm willing to bet most of you who are listening to this right now would agree that immediately after an exercise session, you just feel calm. You can sit on the couch and just feel relaxed, content, like you don't have to lift a finger. Everything's good. That's that lowered state of anxiety, and simultaneously those higher feelings of what we might call tranquility. So again, I'm willing to bet most people would agree with that. You just feel calmer after you exercise. And these effects are most pronounced within an hour after exercise, but they do stick around for as much as 24 hours, depending on the intensity of that exercise session. So that's what I mean by acute effects. They're immediate and relatively temporary, 24 hours. Some research has shown that sort of the sweet spot to get the best acute effects, the lowest anxiety, highest feelings of tranquility, would be what's called moderate aerobic intensity exercise. So this would be exercise that uses about 30 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. So that would kind of be those runs, those like 3, 4, 5 mile runs that you go on. This study that I'm referencing right now also looked at what they called quiet relaxation, and they found that having a period of quiet relaxation did improve um, these these measures. It did lower anxiety and increase tranquility, but the effects were much more short-lived. So quiet relaxation benefits lasted for about an hour. Exercise benefits lasted for almost 24 hours. So again, it doesn't necessarily matter what type of exercise, but it does matter how long you exercise. The sweet spot, or not the sweet spot, but the threshold, I guess, would be 30 minutes. So if you can exercise for a 30-minute period, that's where we start to see these acute benefits accrue. And again, if you exercise in the weight room lifting weights, or you exercise for 30 minutes running on the track or on the roads, or you spend 30 minutes practicing yoga, it doesn't matter what type of exercise, but if you can do it for 30 minutes, that's where we start to see these benefits happen. These benefits occur regardless of how intense that workout is. I know that slide says the effect occurs regardless of duration. Should probably take that out. We'll see if I can do that in post editing here. Yeah, learning a whole new set of editing skills. Okay, anyway. Um, and then this effect also occurs regardless of your sex. It occurs regardless of your prior activity level, your prior fitness level, prior anxiety level, age, or mental health diagnosis. So those are the acute effects, but the chronic effects are the ones that last a long time. These are the effects that sort of build up after days, weeks, months, even years of regularly exercising. So the first and foremost would be increased well-being. And that goes back to that subjective well-being concept that we mentioned earlier. So again, this is just general happiness. That's all that well-being means. If someone has a high level of subjective well-being, they tend to be a happy person. We also see an increased resiliency to mental health issues, and that goes hand in hand with subjective well-being. Happier people tend to experience fewer mental health issues. We see a reduction of stress hormones, so epinephrine, norepinephrine, adrenaline are reduced in a resting state. So you simply do not have the stress hormones, as much stress hormones in your bloodstream if you do exercise regularly. We see a reduction in trait anxiety, which is a major personality trait. So chronically exercising, regularly exercising, will actually affect your personality. It'll make you a less anxious person. And this effect has been observed across ages, across sexes, across cultures. Um, it really is a global, human-wide phenomenon. All right, so we've got a description of what happens when we exercise. We've got all of these measures that improve, all of these negative measures decrease. So, how exactly does this occur? That is a very important question that, as scientists, we are interested in answering. So, first, we can explain things physiologically. And there's a couple different ideas out there about how this might happen. The first being that with an increase or an improvement in our cardiovascular system, we increase the amount of blood that flows around our body. As a side effect of that, we increase the amount of blood that flows to our brain. Brain is a very, very hungry, greedy organ. It uses a lot of blood, a lot of oxygen, a lot of nutrients are required to keep our noggins ticking away successfully. So by increasing the ability of our bodies to supply the brain with blood, there is this idea out there that it just functions better. Um, we also see a a change in neurotransmitters that are typically associated with positive affect. Positive affect being uh, good emotions, positive emotions like happiness, tranquility. So after exercise, after engaging in regular exercise for an extended period of time, we tend to see people's neurotransmitter levels change, a decrease in adrenaline, an increase in serotonin. And then we also tend to see an overall reduced level of muscle tension. So that's what happens on the physiological side of things. On the psychological side of things, we may also have some explanations for why we see all those mental health benefits. So most people who exercise regularly tend to say that they have some increased feelings of control. They have increased feelings of confidence, they have increased feelings of competency. They tend to just have overall improved self-esteem. And it's not exactly a satisfying explanation of how this occurs. Like, it's not exactly explained yet how that direct connection between exercising and improved self-esteem occurs. We've got several different ideas floating around out there, but the direct link hasn't really been made yet. So there's sort of just a generic set of factors that improve psychologically when people engage in regular exercise. So specifically talking about cognitive processes and how they improve with exercise. Um, Typically, when people engage in regular exercise over extended periods of time, we see cognitive improvement. We see people get better at basic cognitive tasks like planning and problem solving, executive control, working memory. So, executive control is sort of like um, I guess a sports analogy would be the quarterback of your attentional processing. It's sort of the master system that diverts attentional resources towards different stimuli. So if you want to focus on something in your visual field, your executive control mechanisms will allocate resources towards your visual processing centers. If you want to daydream about, oh, I don't know, sailing in the Caribbean or something like that, your executive control mechanisms will divert resources towards those daydreaming mechanisms. So the executive control gets a big benefit from exercise. It just sort of has more resources available, it works more efficiently. But some of the most pronounced benefits of cognitive functioning as it relates to exercise are seen in children who have been diagnosed with ADHD. Uh, this these effects have been observed anecdotally by teachers who work with these kids, and these effects have also been measured more systematically, more scientifically, as far as classroom behavior and whatnot. So again, we see that 30-minute threshold. That's sort of the minimum threshold that you have to get over to start to see these cognitive benefits. So if you exercise for 30 minutes, on a tri-weekly, that's a word, right? Tri-weekly basis, that's where you're really going to start to see those benefits. If you work out 3 times a week for 15 minutes, that might not be enough. So just like children with ADHD showed some of the bigger benefits of cognitive functioning after they had a little bit of exercise, older adults also see some pretty large benefits from being exposed to regular physical exercise. And this is actually really, really new research, and the picture is sort of emerging right now that physical exercise can actually repair damage done from aging. This is one of the reasons why, if you have spent any amount of time in an old folks home or a retirement home lately, there are usually fitness classes on the schedule that the residents can sign up for. My would be my grandpa-in-law, my wife's grandpa. he exercises on an elliptical for he does it like 4 times a week, I think. And he's incredibly sharp. Man is 93 years old. He danced to the Tennessee Waltz at our wedding this past September, uh, and he's sharp as a tack. He makes jokes. He makes fun of me a lot, which I'm fine with. Kind of funny. But anyway, I think that's a great anecdotal example from my own personal life about the power of physical exercise into older age. Okay, so quality of life. Let's see, we talked a little bit about this when we were talking about mental health. So I'm going to skip this slide here. And I'm going to talk about the runner's high. So this is a very special case of exercise influencing mental health. So for those of you who might not be aware of the runner's high, this is often described as that flow state that we were talking about earlier. The runner's high is kind of characterized as this sort of like euphoric sensation. Everything is easy. Time might slow down a little bit, but you really have this sort of um, almost overwhelming, maybe even giddy sense of just how good life is right now. This is typically accompanied by an enhanced appreciation of the natural world around you. Some people will even report an out of body experience that comes along with this runner's high. Um, Personally, I have experienced a couple runners highs in my life. Uh, they have lasted for varying amounts of time. Um, but whenever I've gone for what I consider to be really long runs, so if I go for more than 15 miles or so, that's when I really get into runner's high territory. Um, and I, I mean that phrase there, euphoric sensation, kind of sums it up. It's this overwhelming feeling of that everything's good in the world. Doesn't really last too long. You know, before long, you realize that your feet really hurt or your knees a little sore, or you're really thirsty. Maybe you have to go to the bathroom, but you're on the side of a really busy highway or something like that. So, you know, the real world almost comes crashing down on you pretty quickly after these runners highs. But while they last, they're awesome. They're amazing. They're something that you kind of seek out if you've ever experienced them. And correlated with these runners highs. There's got to be a better plural word there. Runners highs. There is a massive release of endorphins. So endorphins are your painkillers. These are the hormones that make you feel good, kind of loosey goosey, really relaxed. So you can imagine someone is, 23 miles into a 26.2-mile marathon, and there's probably a bit of pain going on in their body, and they get this huge release of endorphins throughout their bloodstream, and all of a sudden they're feeling pretty good, pretty great. 23 miles was nothing. The next 3 miles, easy peasy. And just like the flow state, it's really difficult to control when these runner's highs are going to happen. But just like the flow state, we have a couple ideas of what might increase the likelihood of them occurring. They typically occur when people have fewer distractions. So for those of you that like to exercise with headphones in, that's actually a distraction, and it might decrease the chances of you experiencing a flow state or a runner's high. And again, we see that magic 30-minute threshold. So if you can exercise or if you can run for longer than that 30 minutes, you're going to greatly increase your chances of experiencing one. But again, this is not something everyone experiences. Some very serious runners have gone their whole careers without claiming to have experienced a runner's high. So um, there is a huge shift that is beginning in the medical field in this country. And that is moving from a treatment model of medical care to a preventative model of medical care. Uh, Currently, in the medical field, we are sort of responding to illnesses and diseases. We're responding to symptoms as they arise. If someone gets sick, they come in, and we're fairly good at diagnosing and treating them. But there is sort of this paradigm shift that's going on where the focus of medical care is shifting from treatment to prevention. So trying to focus on decreasing the chances that someone will contract an illness in the first place, and using exercise to sort of stave off those physical complications and mental complications is a big, big part of that paradigm shift. So there's been a huge focus on using exercise as a form of therapy, and specifically as a form of preventative therapy in the past couple decades here. But it's always important to remember that when you are considering using exercise as a therapy tool or a preventative therapy tool, you have to take into account a couple key points. First of all, exercise is not for everyone. There are physical limitations on people that might prevent them from being able to exercise safely. Some people may have had very negative experiences with exercise in the past. Remember when we talked about that hypothetical coach who uses conditioning as punishment? I'm sure none of you have ever experienced something like that in your lives. But it's possible that someone had a really strict, stern, angry coach in their past life and are totally, totally turned off by the idea of running for fun. In order for exercise to be used effectively, it's a good idea to have an individualized program. Again, aim for that 30-minute threshold to experience a lot of those benefits. But if you can't exercise for 30 minutes straight for some reason, then do whatever you can. Any amount will benefit you. Intensity and frequency, obviously tailor those towards the individual. And then practicality, and this is a huge one for our modern lives. Really busy lives. You guys, as students, spend a lot of time in the classroom. You spend a lot of time studying outside of the classroom. You've got busy social lives. You've got a lot of things going on. And unfortunately, I hate to bring you guys bad news, but it only gets worse as you get older. Time speeds up, your day fills up before you even know it, and it's very difficult to find time to exercise sometimes. So, to get around that, it's actually encouraged by a lot of healthcare professionals to just sort of work exercise into your daily routine, make it part of your daily habits. One way that I've started doing that is biking to work. Obviously, not in the winter when snow is covering shoulders on the highway, but whenever the weather allows it, I try to bike to work. I live in Washburn, so biking to Ashland is a good 45-minute bike ride. And it's a great way to work it into my day. It's my commute to work. I don't have a choice. I have to do it. And I bike to work, I bike home, and voila, I've got my exercise in for the day. I feel great, and I still got plenty of sunshine to walk the dogs and make dinner and do all that kind of stuff. So, one of the best ways to make clients or make people um, excited about exercise is to make it social, make it competitive, and make it fun, most importantly. Drop those F bombs, make it fun. So the video that is linked there on the bottom of the slide, that will take you to a web page that talks about a study that recently came out of the University of Pennsylvania, and they looked at different ways that they grouped participants into different groups and ran them through this exercise program, and they look at which groups succeeded the most, which groups lost the most weight, improved their strength the most, went to the most number of classes. So I'd like you guys to watch that video, and then I will give you extra credit if you can tell me which group or which groups improved the most on their, or according to the study, which groups were the most successful in increasing their exercise amount. So extra credit if you can tell me which group or groups did the best in that study, and you can write your answer on the quiz you will have to do for this lecture as well. So the quiz should be accessible on the course website right next to where you right next to where you accessed this lecture. So this quiz will be titled Exercise and Mental Health Quiz. So appropriately named. All right, guys. That is the first lecture there, and hopefully this all went well. And I will see you for the next one. Stay tuned.